Yo, how's it going? Today we're talking about R&B stylistic components. Um, always feel free to get involved, have some comments, make any sort of like exercises that you like to do, or and other things that you notice as we're going. The first part of this is just making sure you listen to some music, do some research, and start to analyze like what are you hearing in the sounds. Um, and then from there, we'll start to put together our strategy for getting these stylistic components and then how to kind of integrate them back into our singing. With R&B or rhythm and blues singing, think of it as like a combination of jazz, soul, electronic, eventually kind of expands out into like funk music and some other things like that, gospel, of course. And then eventually, like these kinds of styles had huge influence on rock music, things like that as well. That's you'll see a lot of crossover with rock and pop music, as there's a lot of R&B influence in all of this stuff. Let's first talk about like our tone quality. With any style things, I think about our tone quality. What are the kind of overall vocal techniques that we're going to use? Um, Various kind of like stylistic elements, like scoops and falls and voice cracking and things like that. And we'll talk about how we make this really expressive. Um, and then we also talk about like what are the theory components or the scales and particular kinds of sounds that we want that help us get more of this sort of soulful singing. Yeah, as always, good to see familiar faces. So let's just go into some particular things. For some of this, you might seem obvious to some, but in general, one thing that we find with R&B style is there's actually like a lot of sort of dynamic change in tone quality, like playing around with vowel modification, like swallowing your vowels a little bit and sometimes purposefully kind of brightening them and pushing your tongue forward and going from like twang all the way back to sort of a covered resonance and back and forth. But in general, what you want to find first with a lot of these styles is that sort of light, kind of breathy, smooth mix. I think that's a good place to start. So when we're talking about breathiness, one thing that's really tricky is we want to make sure that we're not pushing air out, but really just relaxing our cord compression so that there's more air escaping, but we're not actually trying to push. So when we think of like whispering, we're doing the wrong thing. So if I'm going like this, hey, hey, that's actually squeezing and sort of fatiguing my vocal folds and irritating them. So really what you want to think about is influence from your head voice, right? So I like to do a lot of things where I'm going from head voice down into chest voice to find that sort of nice breathy tone that we want, first and foremost. So for this, you want to think of taking like more rounded vowels like ooh, and then pulling them down into chest voice. So I'll do these kinds of exercises. I'll be like, "Thoo, ah, thoo, ah, thoo, ah." And once you're able to get into that place, you can kind of just almost talk right there and think of like, ha, ha, ha. So one other way that people do this is thinking about like the H sound. But the reason I think of actually registration first is I think that's a healthier way of getting into that. Um, with the ha kind of sound or fogging the mirror, we might run the risk of trying to push air out. Instead, like the concept of an H is more air. So if we think of just like a clean tone being something where I'm like na and you're gonna hear that really kind of clear ring in the sound versus complete air, which would be like we want somewhere in between the two, right? So like na ha hey. So using exercises where you put a hey or an H in there can be helpful, but just be mindful that you're not squeezing. And if you feel like you're squeezing or getting really throaty with the breathiness, do this exercise where you're coming down from head voice, going like ooh, ah, ha, ha. The other thing is just practicing rounding over your vowels as you go up in your chest voice. So one that I do a lot, right, is going like na no na no na no. Oh. Yeah, and then the other thing about the H is like you think about it often like before a word happens, think if you can think of like including that H inside the word itself, like the visualization of that helps you get that past your consonant, right? So a lot of times our voice comes out too full or too clear right after we do our consonants. So if I'm like, no, it's gonna come out kind of chunky. But if I think nah, like no, 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 hey, right? That's where I can start to get kind of some of that tone. Now, just know that like that's a kind of a default for like smooth singing. We definitely get like really brassy, belty sounds too, but it's good to start with the lighter thing before you go to the more heavy kind of singing. Um, so overall, I'd say it's kind of like from breathy to belt and back with a lot of our tone quality. And there's a lot of swelling that happens, meaning that like you sing a note and kind of grow into it and then let it relax again. So you can just practice this on like simple pitches, like kind of what I did with the no thing and like a minor sound, like going like no 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 hey, and just trying to kind of practice coming on and off of your voice a little bit. Um, we'll keep adding to this because there's other components that when you layer them on, it just makes it more and more like the sound. So think of this as kind of like a layering effect. Um, oh, and the other thing before I forget is this is a good example of a style that uses the like falsetto style. This is also for that sort of tonal contrast. This is also something you want to be careful with when you're like messing with chord compression things, that you're not overly straining or fatiguing yourself. So always be able to find your clean tone first. So when we're talking about falsetto, a lot of times people use this interchangeably with head voice. It is basically just head voice phonation, but I think of it like under supported breathier head voice. So when we normally do our head voice, we have like, we want to think very tall, and we think of that sort of chord compression sensation of like the G. So like going like we we actually do get that on the higher end in a lot of R&B singing. But there's also this stylistic thing that happens sometimes where if we purposefully start to spread out the vowel, we can start to get that sort of breathy falsetto style. So that's kind of going like this. So if I'm thinking of my E, like E, hey. So instead of hey, hey. So this follows suit with that sort of H sound. So you might do like an exercise like this where I go like my baby, it still should be from the back of from sort of this back placement, but we're just letting more air essentially escape. So my baby, yeah. And so you can really play with that. Find where your limit is, right? So if you're finding it gets too thin and it's like you start to lose your pitch stability and stability of the vocal mechanism, bring it back in a little bit so you can go like, hey, way, hey, yeah. And so that's also something that comes in a lot. So just think of this as like easier in your lower head voice area. And you just practice spreading the vowels out, sort of like breaking some of the rules in our basic technique stuff. So yeah, I would do that one a couple times and just be like, my baby. And then you can even see if you can pull that down into your chest voice, like the other exercises will help you with the tone. So like, my baby, doing that kind of a thing. My baby. Let's keep going. My baby, baby. So yeah, that's a good place to actually practice this light head voice falsetto sound. But it's tricky, and you have to be careful with how you utilize that and where you do that. If you go up too high, it can actually be the wrong kind of technique, and your voice might actually just crack or sort of stall out a little bit. So find your limit with that. Sometimes I'll literally just slide up on that sort of brighter ah and be like, ah, there's a limit right before it starts to kind of pinch, and I have to if I want to keep going up that way. So just pay attention to that as you go. So that's sort of a great thing is this default sort of breathiness, and then you can practice doing your transition from chest to head voice. Maybe even that light falsetto going like ah, ah, maybe go A to E first, like and you'll notice if it goes too far forward with the falsetto thing, it sometimes makes a sort of a weird brighter timbre. So we want to make sure that it actually stays sort of in that back sort of position. So we don't want to go like it kind of sounds a little weird, but yeah, so that's one thing. Play around with that kind of tone quality. Um, let's start talking about some of the other elements because when you start to combine these things together, that's when you really get the right sort of stylistic tone. So one of them that seems obvious but actually can really throw people off and make a huge difference is if you're actually using your scoops and falls or scoops and dips, depending on how you want to think about it. So one exercise that I like to do, because this happens a lot in R&B, especially given the sort of rhythmic element, is to practice sort of scooping in place up to one note over and over again. So you can take, any pitch like a whole step kind of a thing like this, and go like, so if you think of the actual direction or like the sort of pitch change, it's kind of like we're going na 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 na. But then we're gonna go na, and you can just feel yourself going ah. It's kind of like a mix of scooping and then falling back down, right? Na. That's just going back and forth on those notes, and then adding the sort of scoop thing. You're going na. Hey, hey. So it's actually a really easy technique that you can do is just repeat a note over and over again, pulse into it before you start doing any of your little turnarounds or riffs, things like that. The other one is this concept of the sort of fall off. So it's like we're pitching our consonant up on the higher note and then dropping down to the lower note. So I'll do this with just like a simple minor third. So I'll be like, na, 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 na. So the thing that you want to pay attention to is I'm pitching that N up on na, na, and then just immediately letting it fall back. Right? These are a lot of the same principles with like riffs, right? Having that rebound effect of na, but now we're using it as a stylistic component. It's really, really important to kind of pay attention to where that's happening if you're emulating a singer, because it'll make the difference between it just sounding very straight versus actually sounding a little more soulful and a little bit more in this style. So like na na, if I was just na 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 na, so really make it faster and faster. So you can play around with that and then just kind of go like na 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 na, and then you might combine these two together and be like na 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 na. So you can just do that with a ton of your exercises just to feel that difference and really make sure you understand how to do scooping and how to do your fall offs, because they're kind of like the basic first element of a lot of riffs and runs that we do. So that's another thing you want to add in with this style. So we have breathy tone, scoops and fall offs, sometimes falsetto, jumping into that sort of particular whispery kind of falsetto sound without actually doing too much of a whisper technique. And then the other side of it is a lot of vibrato variability. So sometimes it's straight tone singing, and sometimes we have purposeful wobbles and then flutters. So we're kind of like allowing our vibrato and our vowel to open up and then collapsing the vowel as our vibrato is happening. And that gives us this sort of change in the vibrato variability. So it's not super even, Um, that's really important. And you'll see that these things all kind of work together. So as we start to kind of do these kind of large vowel modifications, and sort of pulse into a sound and kind of let it swell and then pull it back, that's where we get some of this flutter. So you want to practice this with vowels that open up and then close. So like I use like, simple ones like hey, because the A is the collapsing, or Y. So if I'm like I was like why. So it's all about how you ride the vowel shape. Hey, and then you're adding in energy and then pulling it back. So that's sort of jellyfishing sensation. Hey, hey, hey. So practice is just simple like that, right? Hey, hey, hey. Or open, open. So you see how I go, why, hey. And this takes a lot of just repetition. If you're not used to vibrato at all, just try to find even vibrato first, and then you can learn to actually control this. But it's just something you'll want to find as you open up to any vowel and you're doing your runs, that you want the vibrato to do that sort of wobble and then flutter. And often at the ends of the phrases, you're going to have more of it. So yeah, that's the practice. I would just move it around, be like, hey, 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 open, open. And you can even actually practice singing into the consonant. So if you're like, hey, like the open ones could open, none. You can do the same kind of thing there and actually get why, hey, open, none, none, none. And you can actually do that even with your consonants. So just places where you can find that in your singing is going to really help. And a lot of it might happen naturally just through imitation, right? That's why I say like listening is really important in this process. So again, breathy tone mainly, scoops and falls, vibrato variability, doing exercises where you practice that. And then another thing that we want to practice is adding in fry and purposeful voice cracking. And those are really, really helpful as well. So with this, it's actually a similar strategy as with the vibrato thing. So they'll all kind of layer on like this. As we're collapsing the vowel, we switch registration, and often that'll cause a crack. You can also, a lot of times like cracking is something you can just practice by imitating, like yodeling, right? Being like, oh. It's really like when we're, cracking down into chest voice, it's really just light head voice and that light kind of falsetto. And then we add weight into it. And then it's the opposite thing for the other direction. We're like singing in chest voice, and then all of a sudden we come off of our support and go up into head voice, and it'll often crack. So if I'm like doing I'm gonna do like that pattern, and we go, oh, oh. So really, it's that ooh where I'm going, oh, oh, oh. And so you can see I can start to add these things. So I'm gonna do a crack down into it, oh, and then do that wobble at the end. Why? So that's practicing coming down from head voice. So you can really just go like, ooh, oh, oh. When you find your natural break range, you can save that feeling and apply it pretty much anywhere in your range. So you can be like, oh, oh. We're up here. Oh, 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 oh. And we'll talk about like a lot of the exercises are using a pentatonic pattern and the blues scale. So we'll just add these little stylistic things in as we're doing those patterns in a sec. So that's one of them. The other one is practicing cracking up into head voice. So you can do words like play or hey, these same kinds of things where we're having our tongue come forward and up a little bit. So if I go like play, and I'm collapsing the vowel, right? Play, why, And so that's something you want to practice. You can ultimately like aim your head voice wherever it's going to be. Like I do stuff like that where I'm like ah, 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 eh. And so you might find yourself going in and out of cracking and then light head voice and then cracking back down into chest voice. And those are all going to be great practices as you're doing this. So I'll make these exercises more complicated as we go, but that's part of it. And then you can think of like even scraping up a little bit of fry as you're doing them, like why, 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 oh, oh. And that's going to be part of this vibe for sure. So, yeah, so those are all different kind of elements that we can use and incorporate. You don't have to do all of them, but you have to have a certain combination of them to make it happen. Um, so yeah, that's a big part of it. Let's spend some time now talking about the blues scale. Particularly the minor pentatonic is really good to work on, although ultimately it's just the same thing, right? Just sort of based on your relative major and minor. But let's go over this and then we'll talk about how we add in blues notes and what those sound like. So the first thing that we want to do, so we're going like, essentially it goes 1, 3, 4, 5, and then we go 7, 8, 7, 5, 4, 3, 1. That's our basic pentatonic. So all these exercises I'm doing are like that minor pentatonic. So when I go like na 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 na, I'm doing that 5, 4, 3, 1. So that even in of itself is a great practice, and you can do all these stylistic things with it, right? Like it can be like na 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 na, and just keep changing and adding variations. Na na. So that's great. Na 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 na. Yeah, and see if you can find some of that flutter. No, no, oh, right, as I'm sort of letting the vowel sort of swallow a little bit. So that's another thing that happens is like you can use your registration of like low notes kind of feeling a little more swallowed and rounded, and then coming out to that sort of brighter, more falsetto-y head voice as you go up on the top side. Or even just like as you go up into chest voice, practicing sort of like anything where you're kind of like, oh, whoa, oh. And so I'll be practicing sort of that vowel modification. So if I'm doing like a wider exercise like this, like here I'm going 8, 7, 5, 7, 5, 4, 5, 4, 3, 1. And I might go, yeah, and then just make it oh at the end and sort of round that. So, yeah, and kind of swallow it down and get it a little bit more sort of round and almost kind of going towards classical. You can do it the other way, right? Whoa, 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 whoa. So I'm going from oh, whoa, whoa. That helps us get that sort of modified. Yeah. So, again, R&B and gospel are very, very connected. I know that sounds a little sacrilegious, but it is that those techniques are very, very similar. They borrow some of those stylistic elements. So that's all just with our regular minor pentatonic. Again, going from like a rounder vowel, like oh, oh, hey, and you can think of that falsetto, hey, and then just trying to drop down into a sort of a taller sound as you go. And so practice sort of doing your runs, moving from one vowel shape to like a brighter vowel shape to a darker vowel shape. And that's going to help you also get this style. It'll also help with the vibrato and the cracking and all of those kinds of things. So let's talk about where we add in blues. So this is where, like, if you've done any of my ear training practice stuff, where the half steps really help us. So when we're going 1, 3, 4, this is for minor pentatonic. 4, 4.5, 5. That's where we get that sort of blues run. And then you can start to adapt your exercises this way. So I might be like, no, 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 no. Or maybe even try like another one I like is bue. So that's a kind of borrowing from the jazz sort of sound, which is often imitating like saxophones or other instruments. So like, bue, 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 bue. And that's where it really starts to sound like blues, right? That's why rhythm and blues, we need that, ultimately a lot of the rhythmic elements. It's like our typical kind of like syncopated offbeat stuff, but we need music with that. And usually the music helps a lot with getting that sort of feeling of the offbeat. But so for us, the blues pattern is kind of the most important theory aspect to think about. So like, again, it's 1, 3, 4, 4.5, 5, no. Bue, 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 no, 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 no. So it's really small steps. So you actually have to be very, very careful that you don't just sort of glide over it. And then you can actually make particular differences in blues sort of turnarounds or just a regular pentatonic turnaround. So if I'm like, na 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 versus na, right? They both work, but if you really want to blues into it, you make a smaller half step. So the blues scale, think of it as like in addition to our pentatonic. So with this, we're talking about the minor pentatonic. And so, what's interesting, and this is for all of you theory people out there, when we talk about the relative major and relative minor, they're the same pattern. So in this case, I'm doing E flat. Now, if I'm thinking of the major version of this, it's G flat major is the relative major. So like if I'm going 1, 3, 4, 5, 7, 1, that's minor pentatonic. Now I'm using the same keys actually here. And I'm using this one in particular because it's all the black notes. So it's actually kind of an easy way of figuring this out aside from the blues notes. But if I'm going like 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 5, 3, 2, 1, that's our regular major pentatonic. And so that spot that I was talking about is the flat 3, or so when we're doing like 3, minor 3, or raise 3, flat 3, 1. So whoa. So it actually is the same thing, but it sounds a little bit more bluesy when we do it with the minor. I think it's easier for people to find that actually. 1, 3, 4, 4.5, 5, na 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 na. But it is the same thing. Na 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 na. So one way of thinking about this too, it's kind of hard when you just think of it like that sort of flat 3 while you're playing like just the major 1 chord. One thing I highly recommend with any of these blues patterns, if you're savvy with this, practice switching between like a 1 chord and a 5 chord, 1 or 1, 4, 5, and that's like our typical blues pattern. And then you'll really hear how the blues note actually affects all these things. It often happens a lot more on the 5 chord. So like for example, like I'll do this in the minor pattern, but if I'm like na 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 na, and then I go like na na na, and then resolving it, and that's where it kind of makes the most sense. Like let me show you as it goes up a little higher, because then you can really hear that transition. So if I'm like, let's say I'm up here and I'm like, let's think about this. So like, it's like na 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 na, and I'm like, yeah, whoa. I'm in that area, and then I add this other chord, yeah, hear that sort of da, 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 kind of leaning into that. And that's really the same thing actually. So we're playing around with that same spot. It just depends on if you're thinking of it as major pentatonic or minor pentatonic. And that's why the numbers are a little different. Yeah, yes. And that light mixed voice quality. Yeah, we're gonna get to that in a second for sure. So yeah, right now that's just kind of like middle mix just to show the particular spots. Um, so one really great exercise that I like is doing sort of that crack up into head voice and going like, oh, or, oh, let's see. Yeah, let's do it here. No, oh, and you can think of whoa, and then cracking into it. So that's a good one. And then you can practice. One thing I really like is this sort of exercise. It's a little harder, but I go like whoa, whoa, and I kind of practice moving down. So whoa, whoa, and I'm just kind of playing around with all these half steps, like whoa, and then whoa, yeah, and try to just play around with sort of modifying all these vowels, cracking up into it. All of that's going to get you the right vibe. And then eventually, why, and so you can feel that sort of ability of sort of coming in and out of that. So yeah, so that's sort of the idea. And then all of these exercises, you can sort of continue to modify your tone, see if you can add vibrato, sort of cracks with that. So yeah, I really like that where we're switching up from chest to head voice, going why oh, 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 and you can sort of continue to just sort of improvise off of that pattern as you go. This wider pattern I really like too. So as we're going like whoa, and we take this up and we sort of continue to practice that sort of lightening up as we go. So we've got a whoa, whoa, and sort of that feeling. So, whoa, you can practice cracking wherever you want, wherever it feels good. And all of that sort of idea. So that's a fun one. And you can often combine them together. So it could be like, no, 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 no. Just sort of practice that feeling of coming in and out of it. Another thing that you can do too is with these slides, this feeling of bringing the tongue forward really helps too, right? So going like, hey, 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 and that gives us a very particular kind of tone, sort of a little bit more in that sort of whiny place, like, hey. So I could do that all the time, be like, hey, hey, hey. And just try not to push too much, but really just think of it as that change in the tongue position. So, hey, hey, and then, hey, hey, and just practice all of that kind of stuff and see what happens. It's sort of keeping it sort of loose ultimately. Like I think of these stylistic components, we'll like do them in isolation and then just try to incorporate them into these kinds of patterns that you're going to find. It just feels more authentic, which is kind of what's tricky about all of this kind of stuff. So yeah, I highly recommend practice the blues pattern with the minor pentatonic first. So doing like na 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 na, and then feel out moving between 1 and 5. Na na, right? You see how that works? It's like no, and then sometimes often you'll literally hit something and like and then immediately whoa, and practice coming in with the light thing and then adding in this feeling of belting, right? So when we do any belting, we're opening up the vowel, often bringing the tongue a little bit forward, but being mindful of not coming like that. So I would definitely practice some belt stuff. So I do this kind of a thing like why, so why, that why. So you can practice sliding that way. Why? Think of belting more as a position. It starts to kind of feel like above your mask as you get into the right place. It's like ah, ah, that kind of feeling. So why, why? So if you're going into all of this and you're like, no, whoa, no, whoa, and then you can start to play with that. So don't be shy with the cracking. It's actually kind of helpful to regulate your voice a little bit as you do it. So ultimately, that's the trick. But just make sure as you come lower that you always round over your vowels. So if I'm like doing that, whoa, oh, and that's going to help you get that sort of contrast between sort of the bright and dark dimension. So yeah, that's kind of the idea ultimately, right? So we have sometimes that breathy tone, like hey, hey, why? That feeling. And then sometimes we're up here like my baby, baby, and feeling that sort of thing with your head voice. And then we have our scoops and our falls. So going like no, hey. That's sort of adding in the scooping, and then thinking no, 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 no. Doing that in all of your melodic sort of motion, playing around with wobble in your vibrato. So going again like open, hey, getting it to sort of oscillate, right? Again, wobble is like hey, that feeling of sort of too wide. It starts to kind of go out of orbit, and then a flutter is when we collapse it. You add those two together, so like open, hey, hey. There's even sometimes people will add in like the sort of grit kind of sound a little bit, and that goes towards sort of a rock thing, or even sometimes this is a hard thing to explain, but it's kind of like the sound that you get in a saxophone, or like the Marge Simpson kind of sound, where you're going like oh, hey, hey, oh, oh. It's actually a little bit of a collapsing sensation thing. So sometimes we go hey, hey, and they add in that sort of distortion. So that's kind of an interesting effect. Sometimes when we're really getting into it, be careful with that one if you're not used to doing it. But again, it's this sort of like, uh, that's sort of the character voice of it. And if you scrape it in like vocal fry, hey, hey, oh, then you get a little more of that sort of blues thing. Um, don't use it too much. I think it just depends on the particular emotional moment. Um, so again, you can practice that. Um, and yeah, this is sort of like the idea when you start to add all of these combinations together and you play and sing a blues scale. You're singing with the more soulful sort of R&B thing. It's really fun. It's very playful. Um, so that's the idea. Do people have questions on any of this as we um, as I've kind of been picking and cherry picking various concepts, putting them together. Um, and ultimately, when you add in what you're doing with your song work, this starts to get more and more obvious. There's lots of vocalises too in R&B. So like aside from like the song material, you want to practice this ability to kind of improvise on your pentatonic pattern. That's why I'm kind of doing it like this. And another thing is to make the riffs like more and more involved. So I'm doing like simpler little turnarounds and things like that. You can also think of like the 5-note pentatonic motion, right? So like I'll do the major one for a second here. So people go, whoa, whoa, and we're trying to get that separation. So you can think of like when I do this with like other sort of agility exercises, you can pulse each note to feel the separation. So if I'm like, whoa, whoa, there's a little bit of tug on the vocal folds as you do it. And then you're like, whoa, hey. Just to show you again, if I'm doing it like this, and then I can actually think of this as going to the minor pentatonic pattern, and it's the same thing. So I'm like, whoa, 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 yeah, and then really think of that swallowing thing again. So whoa, and you'll get that feeling. Whoa, and then you can always go around from that minor to the major, and then add in the 5 chord. So whoa, sorry. In this case, it's if I'm doing it right, like in this, I want to do. So I'm going to do this one, and I go whoa, 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 yeah. And that's sort of what I'll do is I'll practice sort of moving around with those chord progressions, and until I get just more in that sort of feeling. Um, also like lots of riffs can go up too, or I just show it like as an easier thing as sort of this descending patterns are a little easier on the technique. But one that I really like for the major thing is going like, let's think about this. That way you can do the sort of that like 5-note run. So I might go like whoa, whoa, whoa. So again, always going from a bigger to a smaller vowel, like whoa, 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 right? Whoa, yeah, whoa. So yeah, that's that feeling. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Yeah, and then practicing your no. So you can start to add these all together, right? I'll do the flip up into head voice. Whoa. Right, and you'll find this all over the place, right? These are the kinds of patterns. It's always kind of the same stuff, actually. And so you'll be like, oh, there's that 5-note riff. There's that person scooping up into head voice and then going down into the 5-note riff, right? So, whoa, yeah. And I just do like that nice repetition until it gets really, really comfortable. Um, so that's that idea. So again, sort of a nice pattern that I'll do is I'll go like na 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 na, and just play around with the scoops. Hey, oh, and then practice rounding over with the vowel again. So is that making sense? There's actually a pretty clear trajectory as like melodies go up higher and higher. It always kind of follows this kind of timbre shift, um, and that's kind of the vibe. Ultimately, like it should feel pretty natural. So you want to allow yourself to just kind of like use the imitation, follow the flow, allows lots of vibrato actually to come out, right? So like you might even practice doing just some like regular round kind of classical exercises, going like whoa, and then all you have to do is just collapse the vowel. So it's like why, whoa, whoa, and that's gonna help. So, yeah, that's sort of the idea. I wish I could demonstrate. Right, there's lots of great material, like songs in general. Just know that too, like when we're dealing with phrasing with this kind of style, there's often like short detached phrases that are very rhythmic. And then they go into this sort of intensive run, but you really want to make sure that you're timing them up appropriately. It's kind of like the rhythm aspect, rhythm and blues. Um, so sometimes it stretches out, but sometimes you actually have to be very, very careful about how your run goes, and if it's like sometimes where it's very easy for it to get behind if it's not like at the like a cadence, right? So if you're like doing something here and you're like na 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 no, that's fine because it kind of slows down in these moments. Whoa. But there's lots of moments where when you're in the rhythm of it, like na na right, where we actually just want yeah, where it actually has to be very, very tight and make sure that it sort of locks into the rhythm. This is hard to demonstrate because you kind of need it on a click track or something like that that sort of gets you that feeling. But that's sort of the general idea. And so just remember as you do it, you can kind of go back and forth between this like, no, hey, yeah, whoa, whoa, yeah. Right, so sometimes it's belty, right? Yeah, oh. And so that's always that contrast. Yeah, oh, oh, yeah, yeah, and that sort of thing, kind of flipping back and forth. So again, it's sort of like elementary level. You're just going, oh, whoa, sort of finding all of those in between places. Yeah, and practicing just that constant sort of improvising back and forth. And the more of these licks you start to get down, just the more they start to happen kind of naturally. You'll feel it in the course of the song, where that's gonna kind of fit with what you're doing. And then don't forget that we do get high supported head voice. So like sometimes people are like, in the same thing. And sometimes it spreads out, and that can be really tricky, right? Going like, ooh, yeah, ooh, ooh, ah. It's really hard to do it light like that. So again, you'll find both things like ooh, ah, going from like supported head voice to more falsetto-y head voice, right? Ooh, oh, no, my baby. Right, so you might start like, my baby. Whoa, whoa, my baby. Ooh, oh, and then swallows it back down again. So, yeah, it's just that sort of like on repeat when you add cool funky chords, and whatever sort of word that you're going to be using your vocalise on, like babe, my baby, all of those are really good. Just whoa, why, hey, yeah, those all are really helpful. And then I just practice doing the same kind of routine, like pick a minor pentatonic. Yeah. Okay. So this is kind of tricky with any of the sort of stylistic things that depend or like song choice. Like I find you can often just take a song and just take it down to a lower key that fits you. But I like any of like the Boys to Men kinds of songs, or like you could do like Isn't She Lovely? That's a really good one. Um, Ain't No Sunshine, I find kind of a nice place to sort of drop into a lower key. I almost just sang it first. Like this is why I have to be careful, right? I mention it and then I want to sing it, and then that would be bad. So that's a really good one. If you're an upper voice singer, like any Whitney Houston thing, it's going to be really fun and challenging to do. Um, Ray Charles, that would be, I know he tends to go pretty high, but there's actually a lot of them that are pretty great, sort of for more of a baritone kind of a sound, like Hallelujah, like something like that. I just love her. Hallelujah, I just love her so, not the the Leonard Cohen song. But you can actually take a lot of jazz songs and kind of R&Bify them. So a lot of jazz standards are great. And that's going to work. Trying to think of some other good ones. I don't know. Does it do, since there's a bunch of people here, like any other shout outs in terms of like good baritone R&B songs with the upper extension? Just know that like you can always switch into head voice. And so with this kind of style, even if you're a baritone, you can really milk the head voice area and sound like you're in a really high range actually, without doing the like really high mixy belt thing. So just make actually just more contrast between chest and head voice. So that's any like you could do like some of like the old like Jackson 5 kind of Motowny things are also really fun. My Sharia Moore, I really like that one. That's kind of like could get a little bit lower. Um, yeah, those are that's like I know that it tends to be a lot of like more upper voiced kind of focused, right? And that's sort of the a challenge with a lot of the R&B. But I'd have to do a little more research on like super low R&B sounds. But I know there's like such a huge variety actually of singers and styles. Um, so yeah, that's kind of the idea here. But you can even just take like a simple like Amazing Grace and practice this. Anything that kind of uses the pentatonic blues pattern is going to work. And then you can incorporate this into rock music, pop music. You'll see where there's a lot of those overlaps and elements. So it just kind of goes like it's more like the instrumentation, and then kind of a overall brighter tone when people are doing more of just a sort of pop version of this kind of style. Um, and that's gonna make it sound a little bit more poppy, mainly just with the instrumentation, and also just like kind of straightening out some of the runs rather than doing as much sort of cracking and jumping and um, uh, Yeah, like that, I think that in general, like, a little less of the fall offs and those kinds of things, and it'll start to sound more poppy. As you add sort of more sustains and a little bit of a rougher sound, you're going to get more rock sound. But you can see how all these styles actually influenced each other, right? Like R&B, blues, and jazz were kind of like precursors to the sort of rock sound that kind of mixed with country and had a little more twang, and then it became rock music. And pop just kind of borrows from everything. So, and same thing with like musical theater and these other styles. They just really borrow from all these other genres. And so, learning sort of the OG authentic version is a great way to just have more dynamic style with contemporary music in general. Um, so yeah, so that's sort of the idea, right? And so again, with any stylizing, we want to think of tone quality. This one's tricky because it fluctuates. It goes from like rounder, kind of more swallowed tone, right? Thinking of anything with that kind of like dopier, like ba 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 oh ooh, getting a little bit more of that is going to help. So thinking like kind of puffing your cheeks out and stuff like that. But then it goes from that oh, so finding that sort of variability in your tone is really helpful. Um, then there's scoops and falls, adding in wobble and kind of like lots of vibrato wherever you want, but making sure that it has it's not too even, but has actually some good distortion in terms of like wobbling and fluttering. Um, then we want to have voice cracking, thinking of going from head voice down into chest voice, right? Oh, oh, yeah. That actually relaxes some of the pressure in the style. And then cracking up to vocal fry. You could pretty much like, it's just like anything that feels like soulful and passionate, right, is going to influence the style. And so you just want to think of it not being too straight, too even toned, actually, right? And this is true for rock as well. Um, and then just playing around with the blues scale, which again is not as crazy as you'd think. There's more that you can add to that sort of blues pattern, but you're just taking your pentatonic and you're adding in a couple little half notes here and there. And then as you fluctuate between the 1 and the 5 chord, it creates these sort of dissonant bluesy notes on top of everything. Um, and so that's kind of like the main idea here. And then what I'm always doing is I'm working through this pattern, like going from 1, 3 to 5, and then these wider sweeping patterns where I'm going all the way from 8 all the way down. And you can also do it with just the major, like 5 note sort of pentatonic riffs are really great. Lots of turnarounds, um, and yeah, and lots of just sort of making sure that you take a moment to jump up into head voice to get that really nice contrast in tone. Um, and then be careful with sometimes like the sort of more rough kind of sound when people really kind of push into it to add sort of like the drama in the sound. You want to be careful that you don't just start doing that if you haven't been conditioning your voice and finding this sort of light mix kind of a thing. Even the like, hey, hey, because it's actually pretty light and we don't want to over support or over squeeze it. We have to get used to going like, sounds super weird, right? It's like a cartoon character. But like, hey, hey, yeah. And you see if I go too far, it sounds a little bit kind of rocky. So that's something that you want to make sure you work with the teacher. You really figure out how to isolate it before you layer it into your sound. Because if you're just going full belt, and your head and your neck comes out, and you start squeezing, this is where this kind of style can really damage your voice if you're going full belt and you just like kind of go like and you're like kind of really squeezing into it. It's always lighter than you would think, and you always want to make sure that you're staying relatively level here. If there's a little seesawing, that's fine, but don't get locked into this pattern. If you're someone who does that a lot, get that out of your technique before you start trying to kind of go into that full kind of a sound. Um, yeah, and then, ultimately, like, there's other things that great singers do, and they're very, very, like, playful with the tone, so you just gotta listen and, imitate what people are doing, uh, and, that's ultimately kind of the best pattern. I'm just trying to sort of, like, break them down into components that you can actually think about and sort of isolate. When they're all integrated together, that makes the style. But you might find certain things don't feel as good for your voice, and that way you can like work them separately until you're ready to do them, and you don't have to just sort of jump into trying all of it at once. Um, and overall, right, the style concepts here is we have this framework, right, of like tone quality and technique, articulation styles, right, like swoops and falls. What do you do with your vibrato? Um, then we have like, what is our theory? What kinds of scales do we tend to sing? And what kinds of patterns do we have? And if you put all of those things together with your repertoire, you're going to have a good way to classify any kind of stylistic genre, any kind of genre, sort of what makes it work. And again, it starts to get nebulous because nowadays we're always genre bending. So just know that it's not like one answer fits everything. And oh well, Abram said that it's like we don't do this kind of country twang sort of sound in it. And it's like, well, some people might actually, and there's definitely a lot of R&B that has kind of country twang influence because these styles slowly merge into other styles and then create these hybrids that later get known as like rock, right? And things like that. So hopefully that's helpful. And we'll do more of this as we go forward. I just wanted to, I haven't done a lot of this kind of style work to just show how that works. But we'll do more rock. I even want to show like this concept of doing classical and how classical actually can really help with rock and R&B sounds. So yeah, we're gonna do a lot more style stuff this year. First though, this first few months, like I'm gonna focus on anyone who's new to following these things like how to find your range. Someone mentioned like what's vibrato, and so we're gonna do a whole thing on just vibrato itself. And so we're going to focus on that first. And then, a few months from now, we're going to really dive deep into a lot of stylistic stuff and just keep sort of working through this. Yeah, you're very welcome and always a pleasure. And I appreciate you all showing up. And, as always, like ask questions, things that are confusing, things that you've struggled with. That's the whole point of this, as I always say. I have my strengths, but I'm always trying to find ways that I can understand other genres to just keep my voice active. Just thinking about what I talked about last week, like if you're just used to one style, you can get kind of lazy. And so it's good actually to challenge your voice within reason and sort of find ways to sort of stretch your ability. This is like when you're really doing this on your own, it's kind of hard sometimes, like on like a live stream to really show what this is like in the heat of the moment when you're really, imitating or like playing a blues pattern and just really getting into the flow of singing soulful. Find spirituals. If you're someone who sings for like more religious settings, spirituals and gospel music is a great way also to find some of these styles. And so I highly recommend like pull up a song like that, try to play a few chords on it, and do this on your own. And that's when a lot of the magic starts to happen. So so there's the idea. It's a really, really fun style, and look forward to whatever we're going to do next week. And again, always thanks for listening, and I'll catch you all then. So take care and have a good rest of your day.